Hello, I'm Richard with EV4U Custom Conversions, and this is going to be our second video in a series that we hope to do featuring this 1972 Volkswagen bus. The last video, which was kind of an introduction to the vehicle and the project, this will be so the second one in the series, and we're going to get started. So I've come up with a little list of the items that we can start with, because there's a lot to do. Everything's in front of us at this point, and so you look at it and you go, where do we start? So let's take a look at some of the suggestions I came up with and get this show on the road. I've started a list of things to kind of do to start on this project. Battery location. A lot of times we put the battery on the opposite side that it's on originally, because we're going to put the charge port where the original fuel tank inlet was, and that's on the passenger side, and we want to put the battery charger on that side also, but that would go in the location where the 12-volt battery is. So we'll move the battery over. Now we're just going to add a wire to a certain point where we're going to then branch off, and so we typically will move it over, take like a 6-gauge wire, go to a terminal, and from there we'll go the original line that goes to the front of the car stays the same. We don't need to wire that, but we'll provide for that. And then we're going to need both 12 volts switched and unswitched for our conversion, and we're going to talk about that. So we're going to identify switched and unswitched 12 volts in the car already. So in the back, in the engine compartment, there will be 12 volts, because we got the 12-volt battery. So that's our unswitched 12-volt source. And then there will be a switched 12-volt source, which was the ignition. We want an ignition switched 12 volts. So some things are going to need 12 volts all the time, just like the clock on the radio, or an alarm system, or whatever you might have on your vehicle. Of course, newer cars have remote entry and all sorts of other things that require 12 volts all the time. But an old classic like this, not so many. But we still, for our instrumentation, for instance, we want unswitched 12 volts. For a few other items, we're going to need that unswitched 12 volts. And then there are things that we're going to need on only with the ignition. So they're going to be ignition switched 12 volts. So we're going to identify those sources. And of course, like I said, the batteries, the unswitched, we're going to have to identify the switch that went to the ignition or fuel pump or something like that. Okay. The other thing that we can do is, early on like this, is we can install the power brake vacuum pump and reservoir. This vehicle has front disc brakes, and it has a vacuum brake booster, and those are plumbed, hard plumbed all the way to the rear of the car, because that's where the vacuum source was from the engine, from the intake manifold. And so we're just going to connect to that same line that goes forward to the brake booster. We don't have to reinvent everything. So there was a piece of hose that went from that rigid line to the intake manifold. Now it's going to go from that rigid line to our vacuum pump. Well, actually it's going to go to our reservoir. We're going to add a vacuum reservoir with a gauge and a pump. That's just the way that we do it. And of course, we'll try to bring you along. And then the other thing we can do is we can install the J1772 charge port. That's your level 2 charging standard here in the US. And we can do that right away and put our junction box where that wiring will connect to our charger as well as our proximity and pilot wires. And then probably the first thing we'll do will be to remove a piece of plywood in the back. If you looked at our last video, in the introduction video, there's a hole that was cut over the engine bay, and it's covered with a piece of plywood. Well, that's all well and good, doesn't matter to us. But there's only 5 little bolts that are holding it in place. We're going to remove that, and what it does do for us is that, one, it'll be easy to put back into place when we're done, but in the interim, it's going to provide light and maybe even access. We're so used to getting everything through the deck lid or from underneath, probably won't go from above, but it will let natural light in and so forth, and I think that will be an aid in this big picture in the long run. So we'll do that. It'll only take a few minutes to do, and none of these are big things, and so, but you know, you look at the vehicle, where do you start? It needs everything. It's all in front of us at this point. So I think we're going to start here, and then we're going to start there. So let me just kind of prioritize these. Let's see if this is going to show up on the screen. So this would be 1. Is that in view? Looks like it. That'd be 1. 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, that'll get us started. That'll take care of us for this video. By the time we get that, you'll be long since tired of listening to me, and you can take a break until the next time. So let's get started. Here's that piece of plywood I was referring to. Looking at things closely here, this poor puppy is a pincushion. We've got 5 holes for this piece of cardboard here, and but there's 3 holes there, 3 holes there, 2 there, 2 there, 1 there, 1 here. Looks like some 3 across, 4, 5, 6 across the front there. And so there's just a lot of holes in this poor thing. And we're not going to drill anymore if we can help it. We are very frugal with the drill. Don't like to cut up or drill into classic vehicles, so we do everything with the least amount of impact that is possible. In this case, somebody's already cut a hole here, so what we're going to do is we'll remove this cover. That'll add in some more natural lighting because we got windows all around, and that just help with the visibility and everything in there. I mean, we're going to use a trouble light, but I think this will help. So that's what I'm going to do first. Now, when you're working by yourself, sometimes it's a little bit of a challenge because, you know, I can't hold 2 things at once. I mean, I might be able to get these closer ones, but this one be able to hold that net. So that's where the old vice grips come in handy. I'll put that on the net. Unscrew the screw here, the net will fall down, and this will come off. Would be a little bit faster with 2 people, but I'm here by myself. So you do what you have to do with the options that you have. Another thing that I could do is I could film all this and then, you know, speed it up and show it to you and fast forward, you know. But you know what? That takes a lot of editing time and film time, and I don't know. I'm just not going to do it. I'm more interested in doing conversion work than I am videography. So you're just going to have to put up with me just doing things like, well, there's our hole. So that looks like something that'd jump up and cut me. So I'm going to put some Gorilla Tape on there, and we'll tape this up to kind of protect us from those sharp edges, just to be on the safe side. That ought to give me some protection from accidentally cutting myself on that sharp edge. I don't know, I may take a look and see if we got a piece of polycarbonate laying around, and maybe instead of that piece of plywood he had there, I'll put a piece of polycarbonate and you can see down in the engine bay. Don't know. See what we've got laying around. But that's for a later day. Let's move on our checklist. What you didn't see was that the time it took to do this little sequence was just a couple minutes. But the time elapsed has been hours because of the phone. So only checking one item off so far. Let's move on. Next, we're going to take a look at the battery situation, and we'll measure to make sure that our charger would fit in there. Okay? And if the charger will fit there, that's the side of choice. This is the passenger side. This is where we're going to put our charge port. And so this is where we'd want the charger to go, and we'll move the battery over to the other side. So let's see if the charger will fit there first, and if so, that's where to go. If not, the battery can stay there, and we'll put the charger on the other side. Well, here's our charger. So it's got these tangs on the end, and so we'll measure that to make sure that there's enough room. And so it looks like it's 13 3/4 inches long and 5.5 inches wide. So 14 inches. So let me put that down. 14 inches. Will fit. And width-wise, looks like no problem. The other side, just to see here, yeah. Looks like we go either or. So, like I said, this is the side I prefer. It looks like we've got at least one bolt here. I'll take a look on the bottom side. See how they've got it bolted in there. It's going at an angle. But yeah, we'll take off that bracket and move this baby out of the way. It's even a 13 millimeter. And those of you familiar with VWs know that that's a real common size on the VW. And it looks like this came with a replacement plate. It's got the setup for the battery and everything here. Okay. Got an awkward angle there. There we go. Okay. So there's the hole.
And transfer the mat. Let's see how this fits in our hole. Well, that's going to fit in there nicely. So there's our charger. And of course we'd have to drill some holes there, mount it in, and we'll just transfer the battery to the other side. That saves us from having to run wiring that's 220 volt 30 amp across the vehicle. Not that you couldn't do it, as I like to just keep them short runs, especially on the charging circuit. So that's what we're going to do. So let's take a look at the charge port location. Okay, so here, top of the screen is our stock fuel flap. The way the angle is on these to put the J1772 in there would require some cutting and modification here. I prefer not to do that. The owner had put a Marenco 110 15 amp charge port right there. That's all he was going to charge on. And he can still do that with the J1772 with an adapter, but this also gives him the ability to charge any public charging station. And the way I look at it, this is what all the new, US EVs have. They have the J1772, so you might as well be just like everybody else, be able to charge just like everyone else. And so he told me to go ahead, since this was not really necessary, since we were going to provide the J1772, to remove this and put the J1772 in the hole that he had already created. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to remove this level 1 charge port and put the J1772 in its place. And that just down here then is the charger. So you can see we're going to be in close proximity. We'll put a junction box in there and be able to have that with some very short runs, and that'll work fine. The J1772 won't be as flush as this one, but it'll work. I'm sure they can incorporate it into the paint job. So that's what's next. The hole's just a little bit too small, so we're going to have to ream it out just a little bit to get that to fit. The key to doing something like this is a little bit at a time, because you don't want to overdo it and then have a bigger hole than you need. Personally, for the guy to cut a hole right there took a lot of guts. I'd be cringing big time to do that. So fortunately, there was already a hole there, and we're just going to fill it with the with this charge port instead of the other one. But yeah, just a little bit of cleaning up there to get that to fit, and we'll put something on there to inhibit any rust. And but yeah, just the note here is to just a little bit at a time check it, a little bit at a time check it, so that you don't do too much and are sorry about it. one J1772 charge port on the back end of this 72 bus. So we'll do the inside wiring and mount the charger later on. The charger that I was using for fitment isn't the one that's denoted for this job. We're still waiting on the one to come in for this. So we know where it's going to go. So we'll install the charger and wire this up at a later point. Next, I'm going to install the battery on the driver's side, and I'll show you what that looks like once it's completed. Okay, we've got the battery installed on the driver's side. We've got the other side available for our charger. That's just the wiring coming from the charge port. Like I said, we'll put in a junction box and take care of that. There's a bunch of stock wiring tied up right here, kind of, they're not really in the way, but it's unsightly at the least. So we're probably going to relocate that in a less obvious place. I think that's something that's doable. Going to remove the straps, the gas tank straps. That's coming up. Get those out of the way. But yes, the battery's been installed on the driver's side, and we temporarily hooked up. This was the way it was. There's two 10-gauge wires that they've got on the positive battery terminal. That's the way it was received, and it goes over to some connectors right there. They've got some spade connectors connecting those two wires to, you know, existing wiring, it looks like, and then there's a couple other wires. Most likely one was for the starting solenoid. So the issue though was when we hooked up the ground wire, the tail lights come on. Well, you know, all your running lights. So one of the things that we always do is we inspect to make sure that, you know, everything works. We've got further testing to do on this, but just at an initial investigation, I'm going to disconnect this so we don't run the battery down, is we can't turn off the tail lights. That switch is off, and when you change the switch, nothing happens. The headlights don't work. The flashers and turn signals work, but it's obvious. See what you can see here. I don't have the light up here, but it looks like a new fuse block, and there's some wiring that looks like it's been changed and so forth, and then there's stuff loose and hanging, and so not sure what's going on. We're a conversion shop only. We don't do repairs or restoration, although we end up doing more repairs than we like, just because we get vehicles that have issues at times. It is what it is. We'll see what we can do. Like I said, we test everything to make sure that it's safe. Reverse lights don't seem to work. Haven't checked the brake lights yet. We can do that. Horn doesn't work. The windshield wipers don't work. I had them pulled away from the windshield before, tried them. They don't work, but like I said, the flashers work, and you can kind of see those on the wall. And the turn signals worked. But we got to figure out why the running lights are on and not going off. So, some of the things you encounter when you're working on somebody else's car. So anyway, that's kind of what I'm up to at the moment. Figure out those kind of things first. Continue to move forward. They've got like a cover over the bill housing. I'll pull that off. We're going to replace the throwout bearing. We always do that. This cross member's not in correctly, but we're going to remove it anyway. This thing's probably going to be where I stash these wires, behind here, but we'll see. Early stages, just, you know, have received the vehicle, kind of figuring out all its little idiosyncrasies. They're all different because they're not, to get one that's stock is really unusual. These things are now, you know, getting close to 50 years old. Some of them are more than 50 years old. And so they've been handled by lots of people in most instances. So let's take a look at what we had going on here. Our checklist. Grab my marker. So battery location we determined and took care of. Check that off. We still need to ID the switched and unswitched. We did install the J1772 charge port. And so, yeah, we'll figure out what's going on with the lights. We need to run the wire front to rear. That's just 12 volt control wire. And we'll identify switched and unswitched 12 volt sources, potentially front and rear. Sorry for all the bounce around here. I'm not on a tripod. I'm holding it in my hand. I just can't stand when things don't work. So I pulled out the light switch here, and they had this wire that was jumpered from the 12 volt, live 12 volts. 12 volts is going to the switch all the time, directly to the parking lights. So anytime the battery's on, the parking lights are on. So, but you can look at a schematic here with the lights switch highlighted. You can see that none of these short out to another. And so, anyway, that was an easy fix. And so now when I pull this on, I have running lights, and when I pull it out the rest of the way, we have headlights. So everything's working as far as the lights go as they should. So back to our normally scheduled item to find the 12 volts unswitched, and also 12 volt switched.
Can't believe it. All the wires back here, and there's not one single wire that is switched by the ignition. So I've got some wires that are hot all the time, 12 volts all the time. But that's not really an issue because I've got the 12 volt battery right there. So unswitched 12 volts was not what we were looking for. We're looking for 12 volts that was ignition switched, and did not find it. And so, with all of this, so forth, all the wires that we can find that are back here, there are none that are switched, ignition switched 12 volts. So we're going to have to bring one from the front back. And that leads me to the rest of this conversation. At this point, you pretty much want to be armed with your schematic, and here's the basic schematic we're going to be using for this project. And then I've made me some lists, and the lists are the components I'm going to have in the front of the vehicle and components that are going to be in the rear of the vehicle, which allows me, using my schematic and this, to determine how many wires I need to run front to rear. So just an example, in the front we're going to have the JLD 404, our intelligent amp hour meter. We're going to have a reverse switch for switch and electronic reverse. We're going to have the menu switch for the controller display and for programming. And we're going to have a coast mode switch, which will allow us to override the regen and put it in the coast mode or have regen. So those are some items that we're going to have in the front. And then in the rear, we're going to have inertia switch, our safety interlock relay, our KSI relay, our AVC2. We have our charger regen relay, the shunt. We're going to put a 12 volt gauge in the back here. Our power relay and our fuse block for all the stuff that we're adding will be in the rear. Reverse relay and our reverse lights relay will all be in the rear. Now, some of that's fine, but some of the stuff in the front and some of the stuff in the rear need to be connected. So some examples of that are the shunt. The shunt needs to be connected to the JLD 404, or I should say the other way around. The JLD 404 needs to be connected to the shunt. That's 2 wires. Then we have the menu switch. That's a wire that goes from the controller, part of the controller harness, to our menu switch, which we'll put underneath the dash. And then the other side of that, which comes from the controller, is a 12 volt control circuit. So the 12 volt control goes to the switch, and from the switch back to that menu line. And then we're going to have a wire for the reverse relay. So we're going to have 12 volts go to, it'll be ignition controlled, so you turn on the ignition and 12 volts goes to our reverse switch. You activate the reverse switch, it sends 12 volts back to our relay. The relay is a single pole double throw relay. So our normally closed would be forward and our normally open would be reverse. So you energize that relay, puts you in reverse. Then we need 2 control lines coming from our JD 404 from the 2 relays that are integral to the JLD 404. So 2 wires for that. And then we're going to need that ignition switched 12 volts. And so that's 8 wires. So we'll have an 8 conductor. We're actually going to use 2 4-conductor cables that will go forward. And then the other item is the harness for the Curtis 840 display, which will be in the dash, and that gives us, information on the controller and the motor. So it's going to give us RPMs, the amps and volts at the controller, controller temperature, motor temperature, minimum voltage, maximum amps. And we use that in the menu switch, that display in the menu switch, in order to program the controller. It's used for diagnostics and, like I said, for monitoring. Well, that harness is a 4-conductor, small little harness that will need to be run forward also. So basically we're going to have, that one harness and 8 wires going forward. So once we have that determined, we can run those things. But we're still waiting on the motor and controller, so we won't be able to run that one yet, but we can run the other, the 8 wires and accommodate the other harness also at the same time, make sure all that can be run once we receive it. And we can start doing all the front stuff. So I will install the JLD 404 and the reverse switch and the menu switch and all that kind of thing. And basically we'll be finished with the front, and then we'll come back and we can do all that control wiring in the back. And so we're always progressing. We're not waiting on the fact that we don't have the motor, the controller, the DC to DC converter, or the charger at this point. We've only had the bus in our possession a few days, so we don't have all those things in-house at this point. They're on their way, but this just allows you to have something to do so that you're always moving towards that final goal of completing the vehicle. Received a comment from a guy that was saying that he's doing a similar project, but he says you'll be done long before I am, and no doubt we are. We turn out cars pretty quickly, but the reason for his statement was that he's doing restoration at the same time. Well, we're strictly a conversion shop. We don't do repairs or restoration work, so we're able to crank out conversions rather quickly, and we have a focus on efficiency. I've been a business owner since 1975, and that's the common thread in everything I do, efficiency. Matter of fact, that's how I got into electric vehicles to begin with, was efficiency. There's no more efficient form of rotary motion than electromagnetic. And so it's all about efficiency. And so this is a lot of fun. I recommend, if you're doing your own project, take your time and enjoy it. In 2007, my objective was to convert a car for me. Here we are a number of years later, and I'm still doing it because it's fun. I'm addicted. I enjoy doing this. I enjoy the variety and so forth. At least I think it's fun. I'm still enjoying it. So until our next episode in this series, hope you're having fun too.